At the turn of the 19th century, a vast migration began. People born on the East Coast in Appalachia, in the Ohio, and the Mississippi River valleys began to move west in large numbers as part of something called manifest destiny. These people left their European immigrant forefathers behind and reinvented themselves as original American pioneers, frontiersmen, soldiers, patriots, homesteaders, merchants, entrepreneurs, capitalist prospectors, and miners, born to transform a wilderness into an empire. These people were white, convinced of their superiority over people of color, and had God on their side. These people were self-styled rugged individualists. This meant they were a law unto themselves. They made extrajudicial judgments and execution as they pushed the frontiers to the Pacific Ocean. In their wake, they left behind the greatest genocide humans have ever perpetrated, leaving millions of indigenous people dead, diseased, or in poverty. Gold was discovered in what is now El Dorado County, California. It was the final act that motivated thousands more rugged individualists to migrate west and continue to perpetrate their atrocities, their non-judicial killings, their lynchings. Thousands more died, were enslaved, or put into perpetual servitude. This is the true legacy of the conquering of the West, of which there is little or no trace in the elementary or high school history textbook.
Yeah, it's a pretty scary history. Lots of bad things happened in not only this area, but actually all over California. Before non-Indians came, there are several different estimates from anthropologists that there could have been as many as from 30,000 native people up to 300,000 people in what's now known as California. So there were just people everywhere and been here for thousands of years. Very well established tribal communities with their own customs, their own dance, their own stories, their own foods. And because California is just ripe with everything, there wasn't a whole lot of war because the land provided them with everything. And so when Europeans started coming, the natives were not really very well equipped as far as, who are these guys, what do we do now? So there was a lot of conflict, and of course a lot of the Europeans have a mindset that ours is whatever we can take, and that's what happened a lot, including right here in El Dorado County. And there was a lot of, I think I remember one particular year, it was $200,000 or $300,000 was paid out for scalps, and basically just to clear the land, just like you're clearing trees to do something. You're clearing the population of native people to make way for those that are coming, and for if you're trying to lay a claim for gold mining or whatever, you have to be able to show that there's nobody there and it's available, and that's how they did it.
Catch salmon, been that way for years and years on the river, spawning. The salmon come up and they used to catch them and dry them, and that's their place to fish. They go around there, and the miners had to mine, they'd be mining while they just shoot them, and then the old people used to sometimes cry, and we used to say, "What's the matter, Grandma?" She cried, and she said, "What white people killed it, son or brother or something down there, and you can't nobody get down there, because you go down there to get him to bury him, why shoot you too."
Placerville is one of the few remaining vestiges of rugged individualist power. When attending events in Placerville, it is evident that it is a white man's racial stronghold, and there are few people of color participating or attending Founders Day, and there are few people of color participating in the wagon train, and there are few people of color participating in Placerville downtown activities. Placerville is touted as a gold rush town. In fact, there is very little indication of the gold rush. There are a few buildings scattered throughout the downtown area, though not taken seriously enough to be historically important. A prime example is that Placerville city government has neglected, deserted, and ignored its own historic building. The historic City Hall was abandoned and government operations transferred to a monstrosity of architecture that is in the back of a parking structure. The police moved out of the historic location to its fortress. The Mountain Democrat, the local newspaper, abandons its downtown location and is moved to a parking lot west of town. Elected officials and journalists generally no longer have direct experience with the citizens on Main Street in order to make decisions about their well-being. When entering Placerville from Highway 50 from the west, the visitor is confronted with modern formula restaurants with little indication of the town's past. To continue up Broadway, mall sprawl is everywhere and confronts the visitor with one strip mall after another with formula establishments. A few miles further out, multinational retail such as Walmart and Target reigns supreme, which has decimated the downtown economy for years. Placerville has evolved with its economic needs into a small American town. Almost all the retail entrances of Main Street date to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. It does not have enough historical remains to suggest a gold rush flavor. There is no way that Placerville can claim to be representative of a gold mining town such as Sutter Creek or Nevada City or even Jackson. In order to save its rugged individualist white supremacy identity, Placerville is identified with the brand Old Hangtown, with its trademark and the logo, the Noose. However, the branding and the logo have a major negative effect. Old Hangtown and the Noose are stark reminders that people of color should continue up the highway and not stop in this town. The brand Hangtown and the Noose are offensive. Empathetic people of all ethnic backgrounds with discerning disposable incomes do not stop and enter the city. Almost $1 billion travels up Highway 50 every year, with a small amount of tourists stopping in Placerville. Placerville is putting itself in its own nooses by losing large amounts of tourist dollars each year.
The police asked me to just take this down to the courthouse steps, that we're not to be in the bell tower.
The Placerville bell tower seems to be reserved as a private symbol of town control belonging to white rugged individualist, the organizations that identify themselves as such, and the Placerville Police. No permit was filed for the event depicted here.
I felt it was important to have an immediate response to that image that went out there, and frankly, I wanted to have our response be at the same location, kind of reclaiming the space. It's a response to the Proud Boys co-opting our beautiful the Toys for Tots event. So we had the Toys for Tots event on Saturday. Proud Boys came, donated a lot of toys, and then took the opportunity to have a photo where they flashed the white power hand gesture in a group with the Santa Claus, and it went out all over social media. News agencies picked it up, and I felt it was really important for us to have a response image to go out so that people don't believe that this is who Placerville is.
They're all right. They have very strong conservative beliefs, but even in their tenets, even in their I think they got 12 core values or tenets. It says anti-racism, and the information that we saw through photographs and videos, they have black members. So that was part of my question and misunderstanding, because people are labeling them as a racist organization. Well, usually racist organizations in the 25 years I've been in law enforcement don't include people other than white people in their organization. So that was part of the conversation we had, and it was really good. They left me with the opinion that they don't have any racial ideology. It's merely political ideology.
Leaders of the Proud Boys were convicted of insurrection for their conduct at the January 6th event in Washington, D.C.
We're not giving up our gold!
Most all non-rugged individualist-type protest events are relegated to the periphery of downtown Placerville.
The police asked me to just take this down to the courthouse steps, that we're not to be in the bell tower.
The rugged individualists terrorize and intimidate wherever they can, as witnessed by the boarding up of Main Street on false rumors. The intimidation, however, affects the citizens of this town. A survey was conducted, and here are some of the responses. 1. My son was bullied in middle school as a terrorist, as a jihadi John. 2. I was mistaken as a maid when parking at a friend's house. I'm Hispanic. 3. A boy told my 10-year-old that he didn't want to play with him because he's Chinese and he has COVID-19. He's fourth-generation American. 4. My friends were walking on Main Street. We were 12. One of us was white, one of us was black, and one of us was Latina. This truck drove by with a guy rolling down his window, yelling, "Get out of here!" 2 months after moving here, it was my oldest son's birthday. He invited several new friends to his party, and we invited 2 families from our old hometown, both who are black and Mexican mixed families. After the party, none of the local boys who came would hang out with our son, and I later learned it was because everyone thought we lived with black and Mexican people.
It's extremely offensive, it's inappropriate, it doesn't acknowledge the livelihood and existence of black and brown Americans living in Placerville, California, as myself. And for someone like me who's been reaching out to the city council and reaching out to my officials and signing petitions and writing letters, they're so used to and so comfortable with the noose in the history. And now that someone is bringing it to the light and going through the darkness and bringing it to the surface, they're acting like it doesn't matter. Until that noose is gone, I will always be offended by it. I will always, back what I say. I believe that we are much better than a noose and much better than lynching history. That is not only their lynching history, but mine and my ancestors and everything that my bloodline has been through for me to get here. I need them to hear the voice and the frequency of my ancestors who have died by this, who need it to be lived through.
They, the racist, do not give up. The tragedy of their actions lie in the fact that they try to perpetuate the unscrupulous conflating of identity of brand Hangtown and the logo of the Noose with that of the city, the region as a whole, and the maligned historic buildings. It is a very false claim that old Hangtown and the Nooses have some intrinsic historic meaning for Placerville. Placerville is not the seat of history for extrajudicial lynchings.
California Assembly Bill 2282 makes using the noose a hate crime.
Starting during an era where there was plenty of gold in the 48s in 1848, and you had a collaborative process going on. People were segregated, but you would have, as you can see in the names, you would have an Indian or Native American bar, a place where gold would be in the placers. You would have a black bar. You would have Spanish. All those names, if you look around, you'll see all these different communities were here. And part of the narrative that we try to build, which I call the Wild West narrative, and I think Placerville needs to embrace that it was never really Wild West, except for a short period of time. There was law and order. There was a Native American form of law and order, transition to Spanish, transitions to Mexican, transition to American military law and order, and then there was the flood of the 49ers. And Placerville at that time was very challenged in terms of law and order, but it was all men. And just for a brief time, those men 2 times had an episode that gave us the name Hangtown. The first one was in the first part of January in 1849, and they hung 3 non-English speaking individuals. There was an eyewitness. Some people try to impute his character. I've read him extensively. He was a lieutenant, Lieutenant Buffum. He was a trained journalist. He wrote extensively in a travel journal, keeping notes, and he has other literary pieces out there. So when people say to me, you can't use him, I said, well, what else do you have? He was a primary eyewitness, and he actually tried to stop the hangings. Yo puedo hablar español. I can speak Spanish. Je peux parler français. I can speak French. And the people they hung could not speak English. And I look back, and it makes me sad to think, because when you read his narrative, they had already been flogged, so they couldn't even attend a trial for a crime that they had committed. But it wasn't capital, it was thievery. And then there had been 5 of them, 3 more. A second charge came. Buffum said, after all these drunk guys, and it was all guys, held a very quick, and he called it lynching, and that's what it is in terms of an extrajudicial killing. And he tried to stop that mob. And I can hear in my own ears as I read this history, por favor, please, s'il vous plaît, please, because they didn't understand. They've been flogged. Why are they being dragged out where they had collapsed? And people need to understand, this is not a judicial hanging. That is not what the nooses represent. It represents strangulation by rope, because that's how they died. They were put on a wagon. The wagon was removed. That takes 5 to 10 minutes. It's a horrible way to die. And that's the symbology that I see. And then people move forward into the modern era, and people want to say it's not racism, but symbols have deep meanings. And I just shared the historical meaning that's there in that episode that gave the name Hangtown. And immediately when women came here and churches, not 1850, people were already calling this place Placerville. The name did not stick. It was not a nickname until the next generation, trying to come up with the stories and market the town and all of those kinds of things. So if you take something that was a lynching, a terrible way to die, and you connect it into our current understanding of nooses as a racialized symbol, Placerville needs to put its nooses in its museums. That's truly honoring our heritage, understanding what that symbol means, and pick something else. We have so much natural beauty. We have a bell tower, which is a symbol of unity. We're so blessed with so much history. We don't need to be stuck on nooses and Hangtown. We can be better than that.
So then, what does Placerville have to offer? An American original, an authentic, intact, one-of-a-kind, historic, all-American Main Street. A Main Street that's worth sharing and celebrating with everyone. Main Streets are fading away all across the USA, but not here in Placerville. Not our Main Street.